I suggest that resolving the human predicament requires better common sense. At first, that might sound trivial. Better thinking always helps solve predicaments. However, a closer look at the human predicament reveals some aspects we have overlooked. For example, a normal view of the human predicament includes problems affecting the environment, pollution, exhaustion, and extinction, and problems affecting people, deprivation, injustice, or conflict. However, the part of the predicament on which I want to focus is not these problems by themselves, but the relationship between them and our efforts to solve them. For me, the predicament is these solutions are not strong enough to keep these problems from expanding. Our governments, religions, economies, and technologies cannot keep humans from exhausting and damaging the environment. They cannot keep humans from diminishing and injuring one another. The predicament is, despite our best efforts, the environment and civilization continues toward conditions no one wants. We need stronger solutions. I suggest better common sense. By better common sense, I mean better ways of gathering, processing, and valuing information. I mean better ways of knowing which behaviors lead to which destination. Most of you may be visualizing presidents, popes, economists, and technologists with better common sense. This would be a reasonable visualization if leaders at the top had most of the power to determine the environment's and the civilization's trends. It would be reasonable if constituents at the bottom had little power. It would be reasonable if there was a barrier preventing common individuals from contributing to shaping environment and social trends. However, this barrier does not exist. 6 billion people, through their collected personal behaviors, produce physical conditions, and these conditions contain the trends that produce the future. Institutions grow in response to these conditions, and leaders react to them, but neither creates them. Mark Twain described bureaucrats in Washington as ants on logs flowing downstream. Each bureaucrat touted his power to determine the future, while the institution on which he rode was in the firm grasp of the conditions created by the constituents. So here's how the model really works. 6 billion people determine the future. If there is a need for better common sense, it's all 6 billion constituents. With a whole future generation with better common sense, then they would appreciate bad destinations we don't. They would appreciate and take behaviors we think are unnecessary. Their collected alternative behaviors would create different conditions. Incidentally, different institutions and different leadership mandates, but most importantly, different destinations. In the remainder of the seminar, I will describe the difference between the common sense that most of us share today and the common sense that will have to exist in a future generation if they are to have a better destination. While it is almost impossible for you or me, who does not have these more developed common sense, to understand how a future person will appreciate their world and behave, it is possible to show how our present common sense is failing us. To present these failures, I will tell you a story of how I discovered limitations in the way I personally gather, process, and value information. I will show how my limited thought processes produced a partial view of humankind's predicament, and this shaped my behavior, so they contributed to it. If my thinking is like that of the common man, then what happened to me reveals a portion of the human predicament that may not be resolved without a future generation with better common sense. I will attempt to show you that one way to address this human predicament is to establish a new goal. That goal is to create learning environments that develop better common sense in a whole future generation. Whew. While most people see this as an impossible project, my hope for this seminar is that you will join me in believing that a good future requires its completion. My hope is that you will join with me to build that generation. As the first building block in understanding that better common sense, let me describe my discovery of limitations in the way I gather, process, and value information. It began in 1968. I was an engineer at General Motors designing and testing seatbelts. That work was wildly successful. When research began, 1 out of every 200 Americans died in a car accident. And 2 years later, for those wearing our new seatbelts in the same crashes, only 1 in 20,000 died. Sadly, the cars equipped with these seatbelts did not save many lives. Most people chose not to wear them. Even though wearing seatbelts provided the same reduction in injury as getting a polio vaccination, the same person who got their kids vaccinated decided not to wear seatbelts. How could a rational person choose one behavior and not the other? I asked people how they came to that choice. Some said, "I don't want to be trapped in a burning car by my seatbelt." I guess they did not believe the data we presented that showed that for every 5,000 accidents where a seatbelt saves your life, there's 1 car fire. I don't want to drown when the car fills with water and my seatbelt is still latched. They did not believe the data we showed that submerged cars happen much less often than car fires. Some said, "I have many friends that have been injured inside car crashes. I want to be like the drunk who got thrown out and walked home." They did not believe reported data that showed before 1968, 50% of all auto fatalities were from being thrown out. Many reported that they were too good a driver to have an accident. And finally they reported, "I'm too lucky, good, graced, or ornery to get injured." These reasons for not wearing a seatbelt reveal one thing: normal thought processes selected poor behavior. I quit engineering, and I started researching this problem. I discovered poor thinking was much more pervasive than just not wearing a seatbelt. People who watched the evening news filled with ever-increasing hungry displaced refugees, ever-increasing environmental degradation, and ever-increasing social conflict undervalued these destinations. They overestimated the power of our institutions to solve them. They overestimated the power of the economy, technology, and human goodness to create the future they wanted. They underestimated the power of 6 billion sets of personal behaviors collected together to create present problems or shape future ones. Normal thought processes prevented individuals from seeing a behavior's push toward bad destinations while showing immediate benefits. No wonder each of us takes behaviors that rush our society toward destinations no one wants. If each of us had better thought processes that helped us see bad destinations, we would reject such behaviors. We might even be able to find a better behavior that takes humankind toward good destinations. The most important single discovery of these early years was that the same limited thought processes that kept people from wearing their seatbelts in 1968 also prevents us today from selecting the behaviors that could attain peace. What else could I conclude? Individuals in the human community need better common sense. I began to search for these processes. The search led me to discover what normal people saw in their world and what they missed. Most in the first world saw life as pretty good. During the last century, living conditions have steadily improved. While optimists believe conditions will continue to improve, pessimists believe conditions will worsen. Which do you believe? What factors create this belief? Do you cast your ballot based on faith or understanding of social structure, for example, moral codes or civil law? Or do you cast your ballot based on the world's resources and technology? I cast my ballot based on an understanding of human thought processes. For me, thought processes shape personal behavior. 6 billion of these behaviors create trends, and trends lead to future conditions. When this analysis describes good future conditions, I vote with the optimists. When it describes bad future conditions, I vote with the pessimists. In one of my studies, I started with a bad future condition that exists today and identified the trend that led to this condition. Then I identified the behavior that created the trend. And finally, I described the thought process that chose that behavior. After this analysis, I began voting with the pessimists. My analysis demonstrated to me that avoiding unwanted futures or simply maintaining our present well-being required better thought processes in a whole future generation. That is, each individual has to have a better way to gather, process, and value available information, or they won't choose different behavior, they won't establish different trends, and they won't avoid the unwanted destinations shown on my TV. Let me use one of my personal behaviors to demonstrate how my imperfect thought processes lead to unwanted futures. These are my two children, Elliot and Benny. When I chose to have Benny, my behavior contributed to lowering humankind's well-being. I know this does not sound correct. How could having Benny lower humankind's well-being? I will explain how this could be possible using the relationships among three variables. The first variable is the world's population. The second is per capita footprint, the average amount of the Earth's resources each person uses. And the third variable is the carrying capacity, the total production of goods and services for human use as constrained by the Earth's resources, labor, and technology. Both pessimists and optimists agree on two relations among these three variables. The first, the population multiplied by the per capita footprint equals the total human footprint. Second, the total human footprint cannot for long exceed the carrying capacity. Many people also agree that until cheap energy runs out or global warming floods New York City, total human footprint appears to many not to be exceeding the carrying capacity. For some duration in the future, and in some places, total human footprint seems only to be approaching the carrying capacity. During this approach, optimists believe resulting scarcity induces investment that increases carrying capacity. And pessimists believe resulting scarcity induces behaviors that lower it. And optimists have been correct, for example, the Green Revolution. Pessimists have been correct, for example, fishing fleets racing to catch the last of a dwindling species, have fished it to extinction. However, both optimists and pessimists fail to realize that when total human footprint is approaching carrying capacity, the approach causes increasing social conflict. When 6 billion Benny-producing behaviors collectively drive the total human footprint into the global carrying capacity, Benny behaviors increase social conflict. When I chose to have Benny, my thought processes never delivered this nuance to my consciousness. It never fully registered on me that having a second child increased social conflict. Certainly I knew having a second child increased my family's consumption, and this increased consumption increased the global human community's scarcity problem, and increasing scarcity had something to do with increasing social conflict, but I had 2 kids anyway, because Benny's benefits looked bigger than my view of any future conflict's liabilities. I had Benny because my thought processes could not see the real size of those liabilities. They could not help me understand how the second child behavior led to an unwanted destination. If I understood the destination, I could not find an alternative behavior that avoids it. And if I understood the destination and found the alternative behavior, for example, not having the second child, I could not motivate myself to take it. The remainder of this seminar is about weaknesses in my thought processes and the role they played in determining my Benny decision. You can now return to the seminar outline and choose the next section. There, I will use 3 fun problems to demonstrate both 3 weaknesses in my thought processes and 3 little tools for extending my thinking. Thanks for your attention. Hope you will continue with this learning adventure.